This is Kevin for Passion for the Word. Today's video is one I've been looking forward to, creation versus secular mythology. This is just going to be a brief overview of a topic that I plan to go very deep into on multiple future videos. I had been taught evolution, Big Bang, and all that was a huge stumbling block for me when I first became a Christian, because I had been taught that the Big Bang, millions of years, evolution were solid, without doubt, without a question. They were proven fact. This made trusting the Bible as a source of truth very difficult, downright impossible. It was only after watching some creation videos that I recognized or was taught that true science doesn't really line up with the secular worldview. It actually backs up the Bible. And this is what really launched my faith, was finding this out, and I'm hoping that in doing this that I can help some others do that. Now, right off the bat, we're going to talk about creation. Now, creation is the belief that the Bible is true and factual as it pertains to the origin of time, space, matter, life, and of course, humans. It is a belief that God created literally everything in 6 days, roughly 6,000 years ago, and then because sin had grown rampant, he flooded the earth and, in a sense, started over. This flood is what accounts for the geography we see today. Now, secular mythology is the belief that time, space, matter, and all life and humans came about without God and instead came about through completely naturalistic methods. This philosophy usually, not always, but almost always, denies the existence of God. It's what atheists tend to fall for. Now note that I didn't title this Creation versus Science. That was no mistake. There's nothing scientific about secular mythology. As a matter of fact, most of the large steps are huge stumbling blocks in this. Science proves over and over again this really isn't logical. It actually takes far more faith to believe in this than it does to believe the Bible. And the more science you know, the more difficult this gets to believe. Now, one of the first problems with secular mythology is they approach the entire origin situation with a truth-denying bias. The secularists insist that God cannot be the answer to any origins question. Now, let's imagine you or I are walking through the woods and we stumble across an abandoned car. And I ask you to explain how that car came to be and how it came to be there. That wouldn't be so difficult. But then if I told you, you cannot use mankind in your answer at all. You have to come up with completely naturalistic means for that car to have arrived, been created, and to have arrived at that location. Now, if I said that, you might be able to come up with some crazy ideas. You might even be able to come up with a few things that almost sound like they make sense. But one thing's for sure, since I denied you the opportunity to use the one answer that's true, no matter what, any answer you come up with is going to be wrong. I've guaranteed that your suppositions cannot be the truth. By forcing you to deny mankind, you cannot truly explain the origin of that car. The same scenario occurs when the secularists insist that God cannot be the answer for creation. They've denied the one true answer to the situation. Now let's start by defining science. Science is the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experimentation. Cut it short, true science is observable and through experimentation, repeatable and testable. Now, Kent Hovind, who refers to 6 types of evolution believed by the secularists, 5 of which are fantasy, only one has any basis of truth. The first step, call it a hurdle, is cosmic evolution. This is the Big Bang. Now, it is the belief that a tiny dot, or even nothing, for no reason whatsoever exploded and created everything. All the matter and all the energy in the universe came about because of the result of this mysterious explosion. Now, secularists will call this science, but no one has ever observed this or produced it in a lab. Of course, that alone doesn't prove it didn't happen, But that does prove it does not fall under the heading or definition of science. More so, Newton's laws, which are some of the most basic laws, some of the most concrete laws in all of science, actually deny the possibility for a Big Bang. The Big Bang is a direct violation of Newton's laws. And one thing that's really critical is there are absolutely zero observable exceptions to Newton's law. Okay, so let's ignore the science and instead use our imaginations and pretend the Big Bang actually could happen. That brings us to the second hurdle, chemical evolution. Now, chemical evolution is the idea that smaller or simpler elements by atomic number can become larger, more complex elements. Even staunch believers in the Big Bang admit that it would only produce hydrogen and helium and trace amounts of lithium and beryllium. Where did all the other elements come from? Now, fusion in stars could possibly get us up to iron. But that gives us a real chicken and egg problem. Which came first, the elements or the star? The other problem is iron has only got on the periodic table, a weight of 26. There are 118 elements. So how do we get to gold, silver, platinum, and the rest? I'd like to know how to turn hydrogen into gold or platinum, wouldn't you? Now, when it comes to what we observe, true science, in the natural world, we never observe smaller elements become bigger elements. We do observe them breaking down, going the other direction, but we never see them getting bigger. Of course, the secularists have no answer for this. They just deny the science and simply believe it happened. So, okay, let's ignore the science and pretend this happened. Our next step is stellar evolution. This is the creation of stars, planets, and other objects in space. This is yet another phenomenon believed by the secularist, yet it's never been observed. We see stars die, but we never have seen one created. Now, the secularist will claim that we don't see them form because it takes millions of years for that to happen. Millions of years is the phrase that secularists use to hide their lack of evidence. You'll see it come up again. Now, obviously, that's not science, that's speculation. And in our observation, stars die, but we never see them born. The imagination is a powerful thing, and secularists imagine that stars are born, even though science has never witnessed such an event. So once again, let's ignore the science and pretend star formation happens, just so we can get to the next hurdle. Abiogenesis, life from non-life. This one's huge. Secularists believe life formed millions of years ago, hide their evidence, in some imaginary pond with some miraculous mix of chemicals that somehow created the first living cell. Now, this cell also had to be created in an environment that caused it to live, and there had to be a food source nearby. If not, that first cell would have died. So even if it did, how many of these first cells would have had to have been created before it ended up in an environment it could live with food it could eat? Even the staunchest of secularists admit they haven't a clue how this happened. They are just positive that it did. And they have the audacity to call that science. Now, Louis Pasteur, one of the greatest scientists of all time, concluded 150 years ago that life can only come from non-life. The massive futility of chemicals assembling themselves into a self-replicating strand of DNA is mathematically impossible. We're talking something like 200 plus billion atoms, all lining up in the right order. And even that, even though it's required, doesn't give you life. That's just the DNA strand. It still lacks that spark that actually is life. Nothing in science supports the delusion that life can come from non-life. As in every other step so far, everything in science says life cannot come from non-life. Are you seeing a pattern yet? Now, the secularists will wail that they're the rational thinkers, that they're the ones that are the followers of science, yet they continually believe things that are counter to science, which brings us to number 5, macroevolution. Now, macroevolution is the belief that, at the most basic sense, that fish evolved into amphibians, amphibians into reptiles, reptiles into birds and mammals, and ultimately to us. Now, right off the bat, as we stick with science, no one has ever observed this happening. Never mind the plate that you may or may not have seen over there. The secularist will attempt to hide the evidence, or actually their lack of evidence, with their magic phrase. Millions of years. Millions of years is smoke and mirrors, not science. Now, some may claim that fossils prove evolution, but do they? No, they don't. The term transitional fossil is thrown around all the time. Whenever they think they found a fossil that fits halfway between this and this, they'll call it a transitional fossil. And they always like to bring up the latest find. This is the latest, this one is the proof. The problem is, every one of them fails to stand against the test of time. Ultimately, they're all proven to not be what they're claimed to be. None of them ever turn out to be the holy grail of secularists, the transitional fossil. They're actually so desperate for transitional fossils that they will literally pretend bones into existence. In just one example, an extinct species of mammal was discovered with its feet and tail missing. Oh, how convenient could that be? So what did the secularists do? They literally imagined webbed feet and a primitive whale tail into existence, and voila! The ancient whale was discovered. I'm serious, you can't make this stuff up. They do this in the name of science, as if they know what that means. Finally, the last step is microevolution. Now, this is the only step that has any basis of reality. It's literally just variation within the species. You see, when God created each kind of animal, He put a lot of variation into it. All you got to do is look at dogs, from Chihuahuas to Great Danes. They're all dogs. All that genetic variation is built into them. It's not added later. They started with it. Every time you ask a secularist for hardcore proof of evolution, something observable, they'll always point to microevolution. The big difference between micro and micro has limits. These limits are generally observable. You can only, with dogs. Once you start getting to the limits of size, you get so small, the health starts falling apart. Once you get so big, the health starts falling apart. So wide, so skinny. Once you start getting to the extremes, the limits of what the genetic code will allow them to do starts to fall apart. The secularist believes there is no limits. That's not what's observed, though. We see limits. Now, each one of the 5 steps mentioned before microevolution would literally require a miracle, something the secularist is quick to deny. Yet there's no way to explain what is observed without them. Each one of these events would have to have the laws of nature to be ignored or even reversed. As a Bible believer, I have such a mechanism. I have God. The secularist does not. Now, this brings us to the flood event. Now, the flood event is what is responsible for most of the geography we see today, from the ocean depths to the mountaintops, the sedimentary layers, and it's also the best explanation for why fossils, coal, and oil exist. Now, real science, this science, actually supports the biblical creation account far better than it does secularist mythology. It supports a young Earth, a 6,000-year-old Earth, and I know that's a bold statement, and in the future, I know I haven't gone into a lot of detail. This is just an overview. In the future, I'll go into detail on many of these aspects. I'll show evidence supporting a young Earth. I'll show evidence supporting or defying evolution, defying macroevolution. I'll show evidence showing support for the flood, showing support for all the different steps, why the planets look the way they do, evidence in astronomy that proves the Big Bang false, many other points. Lots of exciting things coming on this heading. I'm really excited about this, one of my favorite topics. On that note, please, to help our ministry out, remember to share this video, click like on this video. If you haven't done so already, please, subscribe to this channel. There's an email link down below. Click on that. If you have any questions, send them to me. If you'd like me to come speak at your church, contact me through that email. And as always, above all else, please pray for us. We want to be pleasing to God. We want to be right in the middle of God's will. You pray for us and ask God to keep us there. And thank you, and God bless.